The myth of the fair fight. For a German Lancer, the Karabiner 98K was a symbol of disciplined precision. You were taught to make every shot count. But when the first American units arrived, that tactical world shattered. The German soldier realized he wasn't in a traditional rifle duel. He was facing a weapon that broke the fundamental rules of engagement. While the K98K required a manual cycle of the bolt after each shot, the M1 Garand fired as fast as a finger could twitch. The numbers told a story of total imbalance. A German could manage maybe 10 to 15 aimed shots per minute under the stress of incoming lead. Across the field, the American was putting out 40 to 50 rounds in the same window. This wasn't just a technological gap, it felt like a betrayal of military honor. The Germans began to report encounters with invisible machine guns in the woods. They couldn't understand how a single infantryman could produce the output of a whole squad. This was the first time they felt the unfairness, the realization that no amount of German discipline could overcome this sheer mechanical volume of fire. The helplessness of the bolt-action cycle. The unfairness was felt in the bone-chilling seconds between shots. A German soldier would take careful aim, fire, and then, for a fatal moment, he ceased to be a shooter. He became a mechanic. He had to break his cheek weld, lower the rifle, and fight a heavy rotating bolt. Every cycle meant losing the target. He was effectively blind for 2 seconds while the American remained locked on. The M1 Garand utilized a sophisticated gas-operated system to do the heavy lifting. It redirected combustion energy to cycle the action and dampened the kick of the .30-06 round. Consequently, the American eye never left the German silhouette. An American GI could deliver precise follow-up shots in under 0.5 seconds. If a German missed his opening round, he was a dead man. There were no second chances. 3 American bullets would saturate his position before his bolt was even halfway open. To the Wehrmacht, this wasn't marksmanship, it was a mechanical execution. The math of despair, 8 versus 5. In the narrow alleys of Normandy, German soldiers learned a bitter lesson about arithmetic. Their K98K held 5 rounds, loaded with a clumsy stripper clip. The M1 Garand held 8. On the surface, it's just 3 extra bullets, but in combat, those 3 rounds were the unfair advantage that wiped out entire German squads. The German soldier would count the American's shots, waiting for the pause after the 5th round to rush forward. But the pause never came. The American could sustain his fire 60% longer before needing to reload. And when he did reload, it wasn't a struggle with individual bullets. It was a split-second ping and a fresh clip. By the time the German realized the American was actually empty, a new 8-round block was already slammed home. This created a cycle of despair. A German soldier would be pinned down, waiting for an opening that the Garand's internal magazine simply didn't provide. They felt cheated by a weapon that seemed to have an endless supply of lead, making every German defensive maneuver a suicidal gamble. Forced inflexibility, the MG-42 trap. The M1 Garand's most devastating impact was how it stripped the Wehrmacht of its tactical soul. German infantry doctrine was fundamentally rigid, built entirely around the MG-42 machine gun. Riflemen were relegated to mere ammunition carriers. The Americans, however, introduced a lethal fluid dynamic. Because every U.S. soldier carried a semi-automatic Garand, they possessed a collective autonomy that made the German squad look like a Napoleonic relic. This shifted the power balance from 1 mechanical heart to 12 individual fire bases. In the chaos of a firefight, the Germans found themselves trapped in a reactive nightmare. They couldn't maneuver or flank because they were constantly pinned by the sheer volume of American individual fire. A 12-man U.S. squad could sustain a relentless output of 500 rounds per minute, maintaining a wall of lead even while moving. They watched in silent frustration as U.S. riflemen advanced with a level of independence that a K98K-equipped soldier couldn't imagine. The Garand didn't just provide more bullets, it broke the very spine of German small unit movement. The psychological erosion of the rat-tat-tat. To the German soldier, the sound of the M1 Garand was the sound of a technological cheat code. They were used to the rhythmic crack, pause, crack of bolt-action warfare. But the Americans brought a chaotic, relentless rat-tat-tat to the front lines. This rapid cadence caused a phenomenon known as noise shock. It led German units to believe they were constantly being ambushed by elite commandos with submachine guns. Interrogated prisoners often spoke of the sheer exhaustion of facing the Garand. They felt it was unfair that they had to aim perfectly once, while an American could miss 3 times and still hit them with a 4th shot in 2 seconds. This destroyed the German soldiers' sense of reality. They felt outnumbered even when they had more men, simply because the air was always filled with American lead. Many surrendered, not because they were outmaneuvered, but because the psychological weight of that continuous fire made them feel like resistance was a waste of time. Against the Garand, the German soldier didn't just lose the battle, he lost the belief that he was fighting a human enemy he could actually beat. The death trap of the 200-yard zone. On the rolling plains of France, the Karabiner 98K lost its only sanctuary: distance. The German rifle was a long-range masterpiece, but World War II was won in the bloody middle ground. Data proves most infantry engagements ignited within 200 yards. In this space, the M1 Garand turned every hedgerow into a slaughterhouse. The German soldier was trapped in a lethal mathematical error. He had exactly 1 chance to hit. If he missed, he was forced to perform a clunky bolt cycle while exposed, facing a barrage of 8 return shots before he could even reset his trigger. This created a horrific pattern. German infantry were frequently found shot dead while lying prone, their hands still frozen on the bolt handle. They were dying in the 2 seconds it took to reload. To the Lancer, this felt like a betrayal of the very nature of combat. They weren't being outshot, they were being executed during their weapons' downtime. The asymmetry was agonizing. In the 200-yard kill zone, the American didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be fast. Precision through the fog of war. A common German consolation was the belief that their bolt-action rifles were more accurate. However, the M1 Garand proved that precision is useless if you can't acquire the target fast enough. The Garand featured a sophisticated rear aperture, or peep sight, which was decades ahead of the German V-notch. This sight allowed American GIs to focus on the target and the front post simultaneously, vastly outperforming the K98K in high-stress environments. In low light or the heavy dust of a crumbling village, the American could snap his rifle to his shoulder and find a German silhouette instantly. The German soldier, struggling with a narrow field of vision through his iron sights, simply couldn't compete with this speed of acquisition. While the Garand maintained tight groupings at 300 to 400 yards, its real strategic dominance was its ability to stay on target during rapid fire. The German had to re-aim from scratch after every bolt cycle, but the American remained locked in. To the Wehrmacht, it felt like the Americans were using a mechanical cheat code, hitting moving targets in the smoke that a K98K user wouldn't even have time to identify. The collapse of the MG-42-centric world. The German squad lived and died by the rhythm of the MG-42. Their entire survival depended on that machine gun pinning down the enemy. The Garand was the weapon that shattered this system. To the Germans, the most terrifying moment was the silence of the heart. When an MG-42 jammed or needed a barrel change, a critical vulnerability lasting 6 to 10 seconds, the German squad became toothless. Their bolt-action rifles couldn't provide the volume of fire needed to bridge that gap. American units were trained to hunt for that specific silence. The moment the MG-42 stopped, the rat-tat-tat of 12 Garands surged, drowning out any attempt by German riflemen to defend. The K98K was simply too slow to stop a U.S. fire team from sprinting 30 yards during those few seconds of downtime. This turned the Germans' greatest strength into their most tragic failure. They felt abandoned by their own doctrine. Every time the machine gun went quiet, the Germans knew the Garands would be in their laps before the next belt was even loaded. The technological culture shock. In the early years, the Wehrmacht prided itself on being the pinnacle of military modernity. But the M1 Garand delivered a crushing blow to that ego. Most German soldiers believed that semi-automatic rifles were specialized tools for elite paratroopers, much like their own rare G43. The shock of realizing that every American, from the supply clerk to the radio operator, was armed with a semi-automatic weapon felt like a direct insult to German tradition. This wasn't just a combat disadvantage, it was a systemic shock. They felt they were fighting an industrial giant that had rigged the rules of war. Seeing a simple American private carry more firepower than a veteran German sergeant created a deep sense of resentment. The Germans felt the U.S. was exploiting an industrial loophole, using economic wealth to bypass the need for traditional bolt-action discipline. To the Germans, the Garand was the symbol of an unfair battlefield, where American factory output had simply replaced the honor of individual marksmanship. Trench despair and the lead rain. When pinned down in a muddy trench, the German soldiers' world was defined by the sound of incoming rounds. Against other bolt-action armies, there was a rhythm, a chance to pop up and fire back during the enemy's reload. Against the M1 Garand, that rhythm was dead. The Germans described the experience as being bombed by rifles. The fire was so constant that it felt less like a gunfight and more like a permanent state of suppression. They couldn't lift their heads for even a second because the American bullets arrived in relentless strings, never allowing a window for a K98K user to aim. This led to a unique form of shell shock caused purely by small arms fire. The psychological weight of knowing that an American soldier could miss again, and still have 6 more rounds ready to kill you before you could even chamber a single bullet was agonizing. To the Germans, this was the ultimate tactical injustice. It turned the battlefield into a place where their courage and training were rendered irrelevant by a rain of lead that simply never stopped. The mythology of the ping. Perhaps the most famous sound of World War II was the high-pitched ping of an empty M1 clip hitting the ground. In post-war lore, this was often called a vulnerability, but for the German soldier in the foxhole, it was a cruel taunt. While legend suggests Germans waited for the ping to rush the American, the reality was a lethal trap. The M1 Garand could be reloaded in under 2 seconds. By the time the sound of the ejected clip reached the German ears, the American was already slamming a new 8-round block home. Any German soldier who was brave, or foolish, enough to expose himself at the sound of the ping usually found himself staring down the barrel of a freshly loaded rifle. Furthermore, American GIs worked in teams. If one man's rifle pinged, his buddy was still there with 8 rounds ready to fire. This turned a supposed weakness into a psychological deception. The Germans realized that the ping didn't signal safety. It signaled that a fresh cycle of suppression was about to begin. It was another layer of technological superiority that made the German bolt action feel like a relic from a previous century, mocking them with its speed and efficiency. The erosion of individual resolve. Facing the M1, Garand didn't just break German lines, it broke the individual soldier's will to resist. The sheer speed of American fire created a crushing sense of isolation. In a traditional bolt-action duel, a soldier felt he had a fighting chance, but the Garand erased that balance. A single American soldier could engage and neutralize 3 different targets in multiple directions during a single 8-round magazine, all without ever breaking his sight picture. To the German Lancer, this created the terrifying illusion of being hunted by an entire platoon rather than a few individuals. This asymmetric lethality led to a rapid erosion of morale. When a German saw his comrades falling in seconds to a single rifleman, the instinct for self-preservation took over. They felt abandoned by their own slower equipment, leading many to abandon superior defensive positions. The fear wasn't just of death, but of the total helplessness caused by a weapon that could kill faster than the human brain could process a tactical response. The contagion of fear. By 1944, a shadow of dread loomed over the Wehrmacht as rumors of American handheld machine guns spread like wildfire. Official German combat reports began utilizing terms like total automation of the American infantry. This wasn't just propaganda, it was a deep-seated fear that the rules of war had been rigged by American industrial power. The psychological impact was so severe that German officers were forced to issue strict orders. They banned soldiers from discussing the M1 Garand's capabilities, fearing that the mere mention of its fire rate would cause fresh recruits to desert before the first shot was fired. This pervasive anxiety turned every American squad into a phantom force. The Germans were no longer fighting men. They were fighting the ultimate unfair advantage. They felt that their training, their discipline, and their courage were being rendered irrelevant by a technological juggernaut. To the average Lancer, the Garand was the physical proof that the war was already lost, a weapon that made the battlefield a place where German bravery was met only with an endless automated rain of lead. Survival over pride, the captured Garand. The most telling evidence of the Garand's overwhelming supremacy was the behavior of the German soldiers themselves. Despite their deep-seated pride in German engineering, many veterans were willing to discard their K98K rifles for a captured M1. In a desperate bid for survival, German units secretly stockpiled captured Garands for their forward lookouts and elite scouts. They faced immense logistical hurdles as the .30-06 ammunition was incompatible with German supplies, yet they chose the risk anyway. They openly admitted that only the M1 Garand provided a fighting chance against an American assault. This was a bitter surrender of professional ego. To carry an enemy rifle was to admit that their own military industry had failed them. Every captured Garand in German hands was a silent confession of the mechanical imbalance that defined the conflict. For the Lanzer, it wasn't about loyalty to the Reich anymore. It was about the simple, cold reality that the Garand was a superior tool of survival, an unfair weapon that they desperately wished was their own. Legacy, the end of an era, the M1. Garand didn't just win a war, it shattered the centuries-old standard of infantry combat. By the end of 1945, the era of the bolt-action rifle as a primary weapon was effectively dead. The American military's decision to standardize a semi-automatic rifle forced every other global power to redefine what an infantryman could be. No nation would ever again dare to send their sons into a major conflict armed with a manual bolt-action rifle as their primary defense. M1 Garand transformed the individual soldier into a self-contained engine of fire, a legacy that forever altered the geography of the battlefield. It was the ultimate unfair advantage, because it bridged the gap between human skill and industrial perfection. If you found this deep dive into military history insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more tactical breakdowns. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. The Garand remains a testament to a time when engineering changed the rules of engagement forever, proving that sometimes the greatest advantage isn't just how well you shoot, but how fast you can do it again.